The following is an OPB original series.
Oregon Experience is a production of OPB in partnership with the Oregon Historical Society. Leading support for Oregon Experience is provided by the Harold and Arlene Schnitzer Care Foundation, Arlene Schnitzer and Jordan Schnitzer, and the Robert D. and Marcia H. Randall Charitable Trust Fund for Lifelong Learning. Major support provided by the Clark Foundation. Additional support provided by the contributing members of OPB and viewers like you. Thank you.
Copperfield was this little, basically a construction camp town on the Snake River, memorably dubbed the Gomorrah of the Snake. And it appears to have earned that title pretty well.
The town would fuel one of the most bizarre chapters in Oregon's history and make a woman named Fern Hobbs an international celebrity.
The whole world noticed because this little woman was the one who was going to clean up this town. Wow, how is that going to happen?
She just had this look in her eye of somebody who knew who she was very determined to do a good job at whatever she was assigned to do.
Her colorful career would span decades.
She wanted to help people and to make a difference in the world.
On a snowy New Year's Day, 1914, a petite young woman boarded a train on assignment from her boss.
The announcement that Governor West would send his secretary, Miss Fern Hobbs, to Copperfield is taken as a good joke by the local authorities, who are puzzled if the governor's action be true. The Grand Observer.
I was nervous, but I was given a job to do.
Her destination was an alcohol-driven town in a remote canyon on the Oregon-Idaho border, a place often called Sin City. Her mission seemed impossible.
Copperfield had a real rowdy reputation. This was known as a wide-open town, and law enforcement was a long ways away.
The media didn't know what was going to happen, or no one knew for sure what was going to happen. There was danger here, but more importantly, would this whole thing work out?
At the time, progressive-era social reforms were sweeping the country. Oregon was considered a leader in the movement. Oswald West championed issues like women's suffrage and various worker protections. At the same time, he was waging a campaign to stamp out vice and what he considered immoral behavior, wherever that may be.
Saloons are really the dens of vice where all of the major vice issues could be found. So you not only do you have alcohol, you have prostitution, sex work, you have gambling. And so saloons were kind of a place where it all happened. So those could be an easy target for crusaders against immorality.
Here's the Snake River. Here's the entrance to the tunnel, and around the top of the Oxbow part, and then Copperfield was north of Pine Creek in this area here. And it was just a one-street town. They called it Independence Street.
Copperfield's claim to fame as one of the wildest towns in Oregon took root in the late 1890s, when prospectors hit big copper strikes on both sides of the Snake.
One problem was, if you wanted to get it out, then you needed a railroad.
So local developers decided to build a branch line to town and a power plant for electricity. The massive projects included burrowing tunnels through solid rock. Workers poured into the area, and Copperfield's population soared to about 1,000 people at its peak.
They needed services, and the entrepreneurs came in and they built things like hotels and barber shops, and 11 saloons or so, and this equal number of brothels. They provided gambling as well as drinking.
It was a hard drinking, hard punching town, divided into two different groups of construction workers.
And for entertainment, they would have little brawls. They had rules, and I guess rocks and beer bottles were okay, but no knives.
As construction projects wrapped up in 1913, the population dwindled to less than 100 people and 4 saloons. Competition for business was stiff, feuding fierce, and unexplained fires erupted at overly successful saloons.
They had a city council, but the mayor and several of the city councilors, they were in the saloon business. They are the ones who were making the laws of the town.
Families had settled here too, and angry parents objected to saloon keepers controlling the town, selling liquor on Sundays and to underage boys too. By December 1913, the good citizens of Copperfield had had enough.
So they wrote a letter to Governor West. They got 50 people to sign it, complaining about what was going on in Copperfield.
The town has become an undesirable place to live. Our families are unsafe, our property in constant danger, and we appeal to Your Excellency for relief.
In the days before Prohibition, Copperfield was a wet town. But Governor West was a fervent advocate for turning Oregon dry. Cracking down on Copperfield would serve his agenda well.
The first thing that Oswald West did when he got this petition was to contact Ed Rand, the sheriff out in Baker County. And Oswald West said, "All right, what are you doing about this? These people are breaking the law."
I would be only too glad to close the saloons at Copperfield. There is no law under which I could do it.
Sheriff Rand, he was a straight shooter, and he wasn't going to go out and just knock heads or arrest somebody and bring him into town without proof that there was illegal goings on.
But that certainly wasn't the answer that the governor wanted to hear.
So the governor, just using the bully puppet, he told Sheriff Rand that he wanted that town cleaned up by Christmas.
Christmas came and went with business as usual. But no action from Baker County meant game on for the governor.
So Governor West devised a plan to send his diminutive, pretty secretary to Copperfield to demand the resignations of the city council members. And that was going to be a way to get the saloons closed.
This was probably the genius of his scheme, was to send her, to not just send anybody to do it. She was 5'3", 104 pounds. She was a little woman. As soon as Governor West announced to the media that this is what he was planning to do, it grabbed everyone's imaginations. If it were today, you'd say it went viral.
You just watch Miss Hobbs and keep your eye on Copperfield after she arrives. She will show the men who couldn't close the saloons there what a woman can do. Governor West.
But the governor declined to give further details, and neither did Miss Hobbs. Leaving Portland, a reporter peppered her with questions.
When you get to Copperfield, what are you going to do?
Close the saloons. I don't think it is well to tell how you are going to do things before you do them.
Are you armed?
Armed? Well, yes, I am. I have a dressing bag, a portfolio, and an umbrella. I don't believe I could do much damage with these.
There was nothing to indicate that she had any hatchets or bombs, and there was nothing on the surface to show that she had any more ability to close the saloons than any ordinary young woman.
So the question became, who was Fern Hobbs? Fern Hobbs was born on a Nebraska farm in 1883. When she was 6, the family moved to Salt Lake City, where she completed high school. But financial problems brought the Hobbs to Oregon, where they settled near Hillsboro.
She was the oldest among the children, and she wanted to help out. And she got a job as a governess for J. Wesley Ladd, who was a banker in Portland. She definitely always was looking for ways to get ahead. So she can't go right off to college. What can she do?
The idea struck me that I could do something greater. I didn't have enough money to go to business college, so I bought a shorthand book and rented a typewriter. I worked morning, noon, and night, and obtained a position as stenographer.
Stenography is something that we don't really think of that as a big occupation of the period, but it really was an avenue for women, not only for gaining a decently paid income in a not very physically dangerous work, but also, as we say in the case of Fern, you get access to power in that way. You're where people are making decisions if you are recording what's going on in those meetings or in those workrooms.
You can just see her. She's paying attention.
With new skills, Fern quickly gained employment at a title company in Baker City.
This was an opportunity, and she ran for it.
By 1907, she was back in Portland as secretary to the president of a bank that held large assets of Oregon's school fund. But when the bank failed, future Secretary of State Benjamin Alcott was asked to investigate.
And Alcott, of course, he ran into Fern. Fern was the person he had to deal with for a lot of his questions. And Fern was, by all accounts, not only professional in every way, but just really strong and adamant and knowledgeable about the bank's activities. And she had defended the work of Thorborn Ross, that he had not done anything wrong. A few years later, when Oswald West was putting together his campaign for governor, it was at Alcott's suggestion that West hired Fern to work for him.
The new governor agreed and appointed Fern as his chief clerk by day. By night, she attended law school at Willamette University, earning her degree in 1913, one of the top students in her class. She passed the Oregon bar that same year. About the same time, Governor West promoted her to a position traditionally held by a man.
That became kind of a sensation, that a woman would be in a position of the private secretary to a governor. And she was getting paid $3,000 a year.
Private secretary, I should say, doesn't mean secretary. It means secretary like Secretary of State, a chief of staff.
Fern Hobbs was, at the age of 30 years old, a licensed attorney, personal secretary to a state governor, the only one in the country, and the highest paid woman in public service at the time.
I can't say how pleased I am. The money I make is not going to be spent on clothes and a good time. It is going to pay the mortgage.
By October 1913, Governor West was sending her to Washington, D.C. to negotiate pending Oregon land matters.
She is the first woman ever sent to the Capitol as the official representative of a state. The Washington Post.
She met with the officials in Washington, D.C., and she convinced them that the federal government should give the state millions of dollars worth of land back.
Seeing her doing these things, on behalf of the governor, seeing her, acting in a public role, but not actively talking about being a woman in that role all the time, it was different.
I am not a militant, but I believe women ought to have a share in affairs of government equal with men and ought to have the franchise.
She wasn't, speaking to people on the street. She wasn't an advocate for, big movements or a leader of any movement. She was just doing the work. She was doing the work and showing that a woman could do the work.
She was not an attention seeker. She was little and quiet, And that combination would strike people. They would see this petite woman and they would think, oh, you know, she's frail, or, you know, maybe she doesn't really know what she's doing. And far from the truth.
On January 2nd, 1914, as Fern's train chugged closer to Copperfield, tension was mounting on both sides of the state.
Miss Fern Hobbs, my private secretary, will arrive your city 2:50 p.m. today. Would request you kindly arrange for a public meeting.
This thing started in being funny, then became exasperating, and now has become ridiculous.
We are decorating the city with ribbons and we'll try and have some flowers for Miss Hobbs. Mayor Stewart.
Talk of flowers is appropriate. Flowers usually are in order when last sad rites are to be performed.
West deliberately did not tell the whole story about his plans. So he was not actually sending Fern by herself. She was being accompanied by Colonel Burton Lawson, who was the head of the Oregon Penitentiary.
She also was backed up by a small column of 6 or 7 Oregon National Guard soldiers. And so, you know, basically she was commanding a little miniature regiment.
They went in plain clothes, so it was not immediately apparent to anyone what the plan was. And Fern didn't spill the beans either.
The town of Copperfield had gotten together to meet her at the train station. They had decorated the town with pink and blue bunting. And the city councilors and the mayor were standing there with bouquets of flowers when she got off the train.
Upon our arrival, they escorted us to the local dance hall where the citizens of the town were gathered.
In the hushed hall, Fern calmly read the governor's statement ordering the resignations of certain city councilors and the mayor.
They'd already were prepared for this by having talked to a lawyer in Baker City, and the lawyer said, the governor has no right to demand anything of you, so just ignore it. And that's what they did. They refused to sign those resignation letters.
At my request, Colonel Lawson took the floor. He then read the proclamation declaring martial law.
And that meant that he and the men he was with were in control of the town, and that everybody had to obey their orders.
Everyone was to file out through the back door, leaving all their weapons with the National Guardsmen there, go back to their homes and not cause any trouble.
Colonel Lawson and his men collected about 170 loaded firearms. Things could have gone south if people decided they wanted to resist.
Well, as they all filed out, they discovered that the other National Guardsmen had been padlocking all of the establishments in the town, so all of the bars and gambling houses and all of those things were inaccessible.
She had done her job. Fern's job was to lead the expedition, to announce the demands of Governor West, and then to leave it up to the militia.
And then Fern Hobbs got back on the train, went to Baker City, checked into the Geyser Grand Hotel, and rebuffed all attempts to contact her. It was pretty smooth play, really.
The next day, the militia seized several tons of liquor, saloon and gambling devices, and loaded it all onto the train bound for Baker. Copperfield would remain under martial law for the rest of the year.
So this is Fern's personal scrapbook, which we have. This is just a scrapbook she kept herself. And in it, she kept all kinds of articles about all the things that she did. Here's a great picture of photo of Fern as she appeared when she came back to Baker City from Copperfield, including a coat with a lynx fur collar and a hat with feathers. I think she was just amused to no end that there was so much attention, and here's one girl shows her pluck. Yeah, she did. It was a media frenzy. The media loved this story, and they had been waiting breathlessly. There were telegrams from the New York Times asking, "Oh, what's happening? What's happening?" It was reported far and wide. It was on the front page of the New York Times. It was on papers all around the country and even abroad that this young woman had cleaned up this rough and ready Western town and, showed them what for. And they were full of exaggerations right and left. But she was a sensation.
She got marriage proposals, lots of them, I guess.
Here is a big full-page spread from a newspaper from Spokane, Washington. Clearly the focus the whole time was on Fern, and I think Governor West wanted it that way. I know Fern realized that this is what was going to happen, and she was happy to do this because this showed the ability of a woman to handle this kind of tough position, and it also, I think, showed the forces of progressivism succeeding over the ways of the Old West, as it were, and that's what resonated with people.
Fern's growing and very public political savvy had sparked predictions about her future.
Since Oregon has granted the right of suffrage for women, Miss Hobbs is not an unlikely candidate. Portland Telegram.
It may be that someday Oregon will have a woman for governor, but the time is not right now.
Governor West was very ready to trust her. And on one occasion, when he was out of town, he left her as acting governor for 3 days after the Copperfield incident.
Through most of 1914, the governor faced a flurry of threats and lawsuits from the Copperfield saloon keepers.
It was contested that he even had the right to declare martial law, given the evidence that was available. But ultimately, the Oregon Supreme Court found in his favor that he did have that authority.
The saloons never reopened. Copperfield itself would not survive.
The whole town burnt down. Whether that was arson or not, they don't know. But by 1915, there was no town left.
By 1915, Oregon had a new governor, too. But before leaving office, Oswald West appointed Fern Hobbs as one of 3 commissioners to the new State Industrial Accident Commission.
Her job was to talk to people that had been in accidents and hear their stories and investigate the facts and determine what should be done.
In a short time, Fern would impress most everyone with her thoughtful analysis of the issues.
Though but a few months in the commission, she has produced the best discussion of the Oregon compensation system yet published. None barred. Oregon Daily Journal.
But her appointment had rankled some of the former governor's political enemies. A critical compensation bill had stalled in the legislature because of amendments that would strip certain benefits and abolish the 3-commissioner system.
Well, this was a kind of a sabotage to the bill that was being done, and it was being done really to get back at Governor West. There are cartoons in the newspapers about how they were going after Governor West people, and one of the key people was Fern.
While holding office, I am more deeply concerned in the preservation of the workmen's compensation law and the protection of the thousands of widows and orphans who will become the beneficiaries than in keeping my position.
Commissioner Hobbs offered to resign if the original bill was passed.
And they took her up on it. They passed a clean bill without the amendments, and Fern duly kept her promise and resigned in May of 1915.
Undaunted, Fern Hobbs found a new calling that would take her to what she called some of the most rewarding years of her life. During World War I, she volunteered, first on the home front, helping lead fundraising campaigns for the war effort.
This is her identification bracelet when she was overseas working for the American Red Cross.
The spring of 1918 found her serving in Paris, helping locate missing U.S. soldiers.
The knowledge that we have found hundreds and relieved the suspense at home has been most gratifying.
The biggest event of her life, she would write, was witnessing the celebration of peace in November 1918.
After 4 years of awful anxiety, the outburst of relief and joy was tremendous.
Fern would later serve in Germany, too, running a YMCA. But Oregon was always home.
This is a bracelet that Governor West gave to Fern for Christmas in 1911. And it's inscribed. It says, "From Governor West."
For a short time in the early 1920s, Fern went back to work in Oswald West's Portland law office. But she capped her career as assistant to the Oregon Journal's business manager. She never married, saying, "I just don't have time."
Her extended family was her family. Fern took it upon herself to help support my widowed grandmother and help raise the 2 kids. And my dad, he always admired Fern. He told me that the 2 of them would go and sit down over a beer and talk about politics and the affairs of the day.
The Copperfield affair, which she deemed personally insignificant, would follow her the rest of her life, as the tale was retold periodically over the years. Fern returned to the site just once in 1959, finding nothing but dust and memories. Today, a park sits at the confluence of Pine Creek and the Snake River. But the surrounding hillsides look pretty much as they did more than 100 years ago, when a petite young woman came to town.
She really fit in with where, white women were during this period of, gaining more education and gaining more of a role in the public sphere. She did that in her own kind of quiet way.
There's a great picture of Fern holding me on her lap. And I had no idea what a wonderful person I was with at the time.
Fern Hobbs died in Portland in 1964 and is buried alongside family at the Hillsborough Pioneer Cemetery.
I think Fern's legacy is the sense of commitment to purpose. It's her steadfastness, her sense of knowing what she wanted to do to make the world a better place in her own way, to the extent that she could. That's what she was all about.
There's more about Fern Hobbs and the Snake River Showdown on Oregon Experience Online. To learn more, visit opb.org. Leading support for Oregon Experience is provided by the Harold and Arlene Schnitzer Care Foundation, Arlene Schnitzer and Jordan Schnitzer, and the Robert D. and Marcia H. Randall Charitable Trust Fund for Lifelong Learning. Major support provided by the Clark Foundation, Additional support provided by the contributing members of OPB and viewers like you. Thank you.